Hi, and welcome to 9 to 42, the podcast from the team at the Guitar Show UK. Join us for interviews, updates and chat with artists, influencers and those that manufacture the gear that we love. Hello and welcome to 9 to 42, which is the podcast from the guys at the Guitar Show UK. I am looking at my good friend Jason Hunt on screen. How are you, Jace?
I'm very good, Ant. How are you? Happy Christmas.
Yes, happy Christmas.
New Year.
Yes, I'm really well. And the world has changed for both of us. You look different to what you would normally look. And that's because we've both got new microphones, haven't we?
We have, yes. Taking advantage of the fact that you used to work for Shaw.
Yeah. And we got a deal.
Yeah.
But what it means is we've abandoned the reflection filters, so I can actually see all of your face.
Oh, yeah, of course, yeah. That's going to go to work now, the old setup, just in case I have to do something in my office one day.
In case you have to emergency podcast.
In case, emergency podcast or emergency Zoom or, whatever.
Right. So yes, I'm thinking we're looking pretty dapper now with our posh. If you see a picture of us, these are the mics that you kind of see all the YouTubers use. So we're getting down with the kids, aren't we?
Yeah, it's time to replace my crappy old USB microphone and actually get a proper one.
Get a proper mic, which is why we both sound so Magic FM today, which is what you've got now moving forward. I feel like I should be introducing a bit of Michael Bolton.
God, no. Although that does come up in the next podcast.
It does. Michael Bolton does come up in the next podcast, yes. But we'll keep that a secret for the time being. What we do need to talk about is as from this episode, this is a sponsored podcast.
Yeah, sponsored by Focusrite. I can't believe it.
I know. It's absolutely fantastic. So we're now sponsored by Focusrite. And if you don't know Focusrite, they do a lot in the kind of recording space. They do a lot of interfaces and they do some mics and what have you. And it's a very simple ethos, their company. They just want to remove any barriers to making music or creativity. So they have a range of stuff and it's easy to use. Now they've sent us a bit of script, haven't they?
They have. I'm not reading it out though.
And it's not really in keeping with this podcast, is it really?
No.
I don't want to say it's shit because that would be unfair because somebody slaved over that, but it's not really me and you talking, is it?
No. But we'll go back to them and say, can we say this? Can we say that? But they were aware right from the very start that it was not to be too sensible and corporate. But, saying that, I am recording on a Scarlett 2i2 interface.
Yes.
Which is the second one I've had.
I've had a Scarlett as well. I had a Scarlett for years and years and years, and I've and do you know what? They are exactly what they say on the tin device. You plug it into your computer, you plug a microphone into it, you plug a set of headphones in, and it just works. And it's just there, and whether you're using it for recording or for Zoom or what have you, it just does what it's supposed to do.
It does.
And I think that's probably the best you can say about anything Focusrite, really. I mean, they have some wonderful top-end stuff, and they do have some really nice other stuff, and they some great preamps and bits and pieces. But if you want to get into doing the kind of things that we're doing now, just one of their little red boxes it'll just do it for you.
I know that at BIM, our whole building, I was going to say Skynet, is RedNet.
Skynet.
RedNet, so any room can be turned into a recording studio, which is brilliant.
Yeah. So anyway, thanks to the chaps at Focusrite. We will mention them. Obviously, one of the joys of sponsorship is that it's that repetition thing. So we will be mentioning it a little bit, but without them, this ensures that this thing carries on spinning. For us, doesn't it? So. It started off as a kind of a 6-month plan, and now thanks to Focusrite, we can carry on going for a bit longer, which is great because we've got some great guests in the offing as well, which is fab. Which brings us to today. And actually, before we go to that, we've just gone. It's the 30th of December today.
It is.
And I don't know if you noticed this, but ITV3 was back-to-back Carry On films.
Oh, it did, yes.
over the Christmas period, which I had to snigger at when I turned it on. I watched 15 minutes of Carry On Dick.
All I thought was we were riding the zeitgeist.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. There's clearly somebody who does scheduling for the wider ITV network is clearly a 9 to 42 listener.
Absolutely.
But I did have to smile at that. Anyway, today. So we've got an epic chat today with a chap called Joel McIver. How do you know Joel?
Joel, we met at BIM in Birmingham a couple of years ago. 3 years ago, maybe. So Freshers Week, you get a chance to have a sit down and chat to a tutor. And Joel was on the journalism course, and I was on the event management and music business courses. And we got, it sounds so odd now, but we got literally hundreds of students running around the building. So Joel and I ended up sharing quite a large room, sat either end of it. But there would be these periods where the students would go off and they'd have like a talk in one of the main lecture halls and then come out and meet tutors and blah, blah, blah. So we had, I don't know, half an hour of sat just chatting, and we'd never met before. I ingratiated myself to him completely, and I was like, "Oh, hello, I'm Jason." He said, I'm Joel. When I'm not doing this, I work for Future. And I went, "Oh, I hate Future." but amazingly, we did get on incredibly well after that.
I'm leaving that in, by the way, just before you ring me and say, "Oh, can you edit that out?" No, it's staying in that.
Yeah.
So he's kind of he's I don't suppose what would you say? He's an author.
He's an author. He's a journalist. He's an obit writer.
Yeah. Yeah, par excellence. And a podcaster.
And a podcaster, yeah. I mean, he told me, we were sat in and we were talking about how when I was a kid, how important the Kerrang journalists were to me. And because it was a pre-internet world and, there was no Spotify where you could go and listen to stuff, I ended up, following certain writers that wrote for Kerrang because I trusted their opinion. And, when you've got £5 a week to spend on records, you've got to make the right decision, basically. And just, how much I used to love Kerrang. And he said he did this podcast with Mick Wall, who was, the writer for Kerrang, called Dead Rock Stars. So I sort of left the meeting, went home, downloaded it, and I quite frankly just pissed myself laughing all the way through.
It's very, very good. Very good. But we'll get on to that in the chat. It's a bit hard now. We had a little bit of a disaster because we've ended up with just the Zoom audio. Joel may be many things, but recording technician he ain't. And what he sent back was quite frankly appalling. And we can leave that in as well because I don't care if Joel knows that. And so we couldn't do anything with the audio because Joel's audio was just pretty much unusable. There's so much background noise in it. So we've gone with the Zoom. The Zoom audio is actually better than the individual tracks we had. But what it means is that we can't edit in the way we would normally edit. And we were having a chat about how much of it we should put out because there's 90 minutes of this interview. And, when you get three blokes of a certain age who like to waffle on, then that's how you end up with a 90-minute episode. And we've talked about editing it down, but in reality, we're going to leave it all in and let you make a decision. So if you're getting a bit bored, then skip forward because the subject will change. But actually, it is quite a fascinating sort of little bit of a middle-aged bloke rant about parts of the industry. So we're leaving it all as it is. and it would be virtually impossible to edit it anyway. So you'll have to accept the fact there's bits of coughing and there's bits of talking over each other and what have you.
Well, to be fair, Joel's coughing was because he's recovering from COVID.
Well, yes. And we did talk about... He gets enough sympathy in the interview for that. I don't think we should layer that on any thicker than he does when we're talking. So we're going to leave it all in there, which means that with this intro, you're getting thick end of 2 hours. And use it whatever you see fit. If it's for putting small kids to sleep... If it's for, some form of distraction, if it's whatever it might be, you'll find a use for it. But we're just going to leave it exactly as it is in this particular instance. So you'll hear the intro and everything again, and then just let us know what you think. Actually, before that, you wanted to do a shout out, didn't you?
Yeah, Ian Sloan, who sent me a couple of really nice messages via Facebook page. Just thank you very much for listening.
I got to know Ian through the other podcast, the Current Diaries podcast, and then the fact that Ian was doing Couch to 5K, and being a runner myself that kind of plods around. It was nice to encourage him along that, and then he's just become quite an evangelist. So, but he loved the Bruce Dickinson episodes, which is great. So thanks, Ian. Thanks for that.
Thank you.
Lovely to have you on board, and if you want to tell as many people as you see fit, that would be great. And I guess we'll talk in the new year, won't we?
We will. I mean, we've actually got the next one recorded.
We have. Do you want to do the spot? Do you want to give it away?
Oh, it's a bit of a childhood hero of mine.
It is.
It is. It's Bruce Kulick from Kiss. It was just surreal.
It was a great evening. It was a really great evening. I thoroughly enjoyed that one. What a lovely fella Bruce is.
Yeah, I think that to survive in that band, I think you have to be. He kind of knew his place. He was a hired gun, and but actually became quite integral to my teenage years because I didn't see Kiss in makeup until they'd reformed, so I was too young. So yeah. Anyway, we'll talk about Bruce on the next one.
We will indeed. Right. Well, listen. You have a great new year, and we'll regroup in January. And best wishes to everybody out there. And thank you all for your support through the course of 2020, because it's been really great to have you all along for the ride. You don't, and I'm just looking at you now with your new mic, thinking you do not look like the reluctant podcaster anymore, do you? You're owning that now, aren't you?
Yeah, I like new tech.
Right, let's get on to Joel, and we'll see you all in the new year.
All right, Happy New Year, everyone.
Hello, and welcome to 9 to 42, the podcast from the guys behind the Guitar Show UK. In our first recording in December, I am looking at my good friend Jace Hunt on screen, and I'm going to wish you a happy Advent, Jace.
Oh, happy Advent, Ant. That's a new one. Not had that one before.
I've come up with this year, and I'm rolling it out to see how it goes. And I'm quite liking it. I like the old happy Advent thing. Quite nice.
Very good.
And we're joined tonight with the person who should have joined us a few weeks ago and ended up with some piffling excuse as to why he couldn't actually make it. And that's Joel McIver. But before we say hello to Joel, one thing I must do is I must read a little quote from his Wikipedia page. In a review in April 2012, Classic Rock magazine described him as, by some distance, Britain's most prolific hard rock metal author. How do you live up to that, Joel?
Difficult, isn't it? It's all downhill from there once someone says that about you. No, that was very kind of them to say that. That was in a book review. And it's probably, well, if you think about it, it's a double-edged sort of compliment, because it doesn't say you're the best author, you're just the most prolific. So in other words, you just keep churning the crap out, right, in large numbers. But nonetheless, I'll take it in the spirit in which it was meant, which is a compliment. So yes, that's a very nice thing to have been told.
It definitely doesn't say you're the best. I'll reiterate, but your work ethic is something to be admired.
Well, that's very kind of you. Yes, I suppose I've put out 33 books in 20 years, as well as being a journalist and an editor and so on and so on. So that is quite a high work rate. And really, I attribute that to having done nothing until I was about 30 years old. And suddenly I got the opportunity to write these books. So it was like, let's get going. Let's do it while the going's good. So that's what that is about, really. But no, it's quite satisfying seeing the list of books that have come out and people have actually bought.
And we must refer back to your piffling excuse for not being able to join us. Being the first guest that let us down. No pressure there. But you ended up having COVID, didn't you?
I did. I was very lucky. I had a mild dose of it. Jason had said to me ages before that, "Will you come on a podcast?" And of course, I wanted to. And then as the day approached, for the few days before, I started feeling pretty crap. And thought it was just a cold. And even on the day, Jason, I was saying, "Oh, I might be there, I might be," and he was ripping into me with zero sympathy already. And then come the time of the podcast, I was actually in bed on my phone ordering the COVID test, which arrived the next night, and I tested positive, and that was about a month ago. So yeah.
To be fair, though, you weren't that ill because you sent a message from your bed, a video from your bed, calling me a twat.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't feel terrible. I felt like I just had the flu, and not even that bad a flu. And as I was just explaining to you before we started, it was the tiredness that was the problem, not the actual feeling of illness, which I still have now a month later. But no, all in all, I've been really fortunate. So sorry to let you down, but I can't imagine I would have been very entertaining that night, frankly, unless you wanted me to cough and splutter all over you for an hour or whatever it is.
Talking of the flu, you're both a couple of years younger than me, so you've not yet hit the magic 50, have you?
So, I've got it coming in 3 months, so I'm right behind you.
So I'm a month behind you.
Yeah.
3 days ago, I got a text from the doctors that said, "Hey, now you're over 50, you can have a flu jab."
Yeah.
So tomorrow morning, I've got my first. I've never felt so old in my entire life.
Mm-hmm. It won't just be that, mate. It'll be things like travel insurance, all that stuff. You've moved into another bracket, into the 50 to 60 or 69 or whatever it is. Well, it's all over, mate. All downhill.
Your prostate suddenly become of interest to more people than just yourself as well.
Yeah, she said the injection tomorrow morning is only a 2-minute job, so I'm assuming the prostate is going to be left alone tomorrow morning. Otherwise, it's going to be a very quick test of that and an injection.
Is it 50 then that they start wanting to go up there? In there?
Yeah, it used to be 60, but I think because of COVID and everything, they've brought it down to 50.
Wait, because of COVID, they brought prostate exams down to 50?
No, not prostate. The flu injection.
Yeah, but I was talking about prostate. That's what I mean. At 50, do they? Is that the point at which they start getting keen on making you bend over?
Yeah. Yeah, that's the point where we start going there. So we've got it to look forward to next year. It's all coming.
I've got it to look forward to at some point this year.
Yeah.
Can't you just ask a close friend to do it for you?
Yes. I've got a close friend that's a GP, so yes, not a problem.
Oh dear, all the things that we have ahead of us now.
I know, it's great, isn't it? But
you two aren't going bald. I can see on the video you're not. I am.
No, I got loads of hair.
Have you? Yeah. I've got a proper egg in the nest coming at the back.
Oh, you need a ponytail to go with that.
Yeah, for the full skullet. Which leads me neatly onto the NAMM show, where Jason and I go every January, and we would go this year if it wasn't for the bloody pandemic. The number of old men, who are obviously accountants or sales directors or something, or plumbers, who squeeze into their spandex every year that was 30 years old, far too small for them. They're all bald apart from a tiny little rat's tail at the back. It's just great. And no doubt we'll come on to that subject, but because it will tie in, no doubt, with Jason's love of terrible hair metal.
We did have a brilliant night out, didn't we? This year? Was it this year?
It was this year, mate. January 2020. We went to the Rainbow Bar and Grill for dinner, didn't we?
We did, yes.
Well, I have to say it was good. It was great to see you. There were some weird people there, weren't there? Kind of dominated the conversation. Who just kind of showed up.
we were at the Rainbow Bar and Grill. It's always full of weird people.
Mm-hmm. That's why you go.
It is why we go, yeah. Although were they Irish? I can't remember now.
Yeah, a friend of mine who writes for Bass Player magazine is an Irish woman. She's a sweetheart, but a bunch of her mates turned up who I didn't know, and I thought they were a little bit wacky. But no, you and I had a good laugh, and there are other people there, and it's always fun going there because you can just pretend that it's 1987 and you're in Guns N' Roses. as opposed to being a really exhausted tourist.
Yeah, because
it's the winter and it's always raining and crap outside, and it's like a 50-minute cab drive to get there. But anyway, there you go. Other than that, it's all glamour.
So I suppose to start off with a question, why the hell not? You said you didn't really start doing anything till you were 30.
That's right.
So what happened? Because was it university in Edinburgh?
Yeah, I went to university in Edinburgh, did a degree in German for no reason other than I was good at German at school. Taught English for a few years after university in the absence of any better ideas. And then gradually started to put together a journalistic portfolio with the idea of becoming a writer. And I didn't get a job as a journalist until I was 29, which was, when was I 29? I don't know, the year 2000, I guess. Yeah, so in early 2000, was it early? No, it was early 99, so I was 28. I got a job on Record Collector magazine, where I stayed for 6 years. And actually, so that was really when I started to do something, what I think has been productive and worthwhile. And I stayed there for 6 years. And it doesn't seem that long ago, I know, but it is different. It was different back then to how it is now, because you could have a magazine that had a full staff of journalists, all of whom could be quite inexperienced like I was, and get a full boot camp kind of training and how to be a writer, an editor, a commissioning person, a sub-editor, a copy editor, a picture researcher, all those great skills. But as I said earlier, I had this great desire to get cracking, right, and do something, because I'd effectively wasted my 20s going around the world, smoking weed and just wasting my time, and just doing nothing that I really regard as useful. Other than I did meet my wife, that was good. We traveled together, my now wife. So come 29, I instantly started looking for book deals when I was a journalist, because if you are a journalist on a magazine as geekily respected as Record Collector, then publishers will take you seriously when you put together a book pitch, especially back then when the book industry was in far more robust health than it is now. So I very quickly got a book deal, and then very quickly got another one. And so between 99 and 05, I worked on Record Collector, kept putting books out, and then I had a bestseller with a book about Metallica. Not because it was the best book in the world about Metallica, but because there was no massive hardback doorstop book about Metallica at the time. There's several of them now, but there wasn't anything like that then. And that was when I jacked in Record Collector, because I then had a whole ton of book deals, and I wanted to be at home, be self-employed, be there for my kids when they were growing up. And that's what I've done for the last 15 years. And on top of that, for the last 8 years, I've also been the editor of what was initially Bass Guitar Magazine and what is now Bass Player Magazine. So it's been this kind of frenzy of activity for the last 20 years. But before that, 10 years of really just dossing around, And I know you guys did the same, so shut up.
Oh, completely. I didn't start working events until I was 27, because I just thought, no one would have employed me until I was about 27, because I got stupidly long hair that used to be a variety of colours.
What colours, Jason? Come on.
I had orange was the first colour that I went, which was initially a mistake, but it was supposed to be a wash out thing, and it didn't wash out. So I had bright orange hair, nose ring, which when back in the late 80s, early 90s, no one really had nose rings unless you were in a punk band or
Grebo band. Yeah.
And tons of earrings in my ears and stuff like that. And then I had black and white hair. So I'd done that sort of like Aerosmith thing where they just grabbed like a clump of hair and bleached it.
Or like a badger, as it probably looked.
Yeah. And then I dyed the blonde bit dragon blood red. I remember that. So I had black. And then
how is dragon blood red different from just regular red?
I don't know. That's what it
just has a cooler name, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
You can't fool us.
Yeah. Purple for a while as well. Just because I could. And I'd never have got a job in events.
Did you have a girlfriend at this point?
Several, thank you.
Well, you got to do it when you're young. But then you wised up at 27 and got a job organising things.
Yeah, so I got a job at 27 and at the NEC. I honestly didn't know how you organised an event at all. I was really just lucky to get it, I think. And then I cut my hair just before the NEC thing, because I was like, I really need to. I'd been in a band, we got to 27, hadn't made it. And you're like, you're just too old at that point to actually make it, I think. So it was like, cut your hair and actually focus on a career.
Terrible, isn't it? I'm telling you, mate, that was what my thing was. By the time I got to 28, 29, I was completely skinned. I was earning 12 grand a year as a part-time English teacher. I was living in a flat with my then girlfriend, now wife, whose parents owned the flat. So fortunately, we didn't have to pay any rent, right? In this little village in Buckinghamshire. I had no money, no prospects, no nothing. In the meantime, my friends, my brothers were all buying houses. They were in middle management. I was like, oh my God, I got to get cracking. So the kind of worker bee capitalist drone thing that we're all forced into at a certain point happened for me then, which, to go back to your original question, is why I've been cracking out books at such a massive rate since then. What about you, Anne? What did you get up to in your 20s?
Do you know what? I wasn't rock and roll at all. I left university. I got a degree in politics. I left university and I did a graduate trainee course with a management trainee course with Sainsbury's.
That is rock.
I was in Newcastle for a little while, where I met my wife, my now wife, because we were both on the same trainee scheme, and then we ended up working in stores in London. Hated it, really hated it. Did 7-8 months in London, really hated it. I think if it'd been in central London, it would have been great, but out in the burbs, it was. And jacked it, came back up here, and ended up falling into a business with somebody I'd ended up working with, who was exactly the wrong person to end up in a business with, and we managed to build very quickly and then spectacularly blow up a business. And so I found myself at the age of 30 starting again. So I kind of did what you two did in terms of didn't start till then, but in reality, I'd had one cycle through.
Well, it sounds like you'd done quite a lot. I mean, It might not have worked. It ended up in a particularly spectacular way. You've at least had a go at doing stuff.
Yeah, I mean, managed to lose a great house because I owed so many people such an amount of money, but learned one very important life lesson, which was I made the decision because I could have gone bankrupt. The person I was in a business with ended up going bankrupt. He straight away just walked away from it, and I was like, I can't do that. I cannot look at myself in the mirror every morning if I just take that option. I've got to try and face up to the fact that whether I was too young or too inexperienced or too naive, I was complicit in this thing. So, faced up everything, faced up landlords, faced up banks, faced up, trade debt, all this kind of thing, and ended up losing a house ending up having a horrible 3 years. Well, not a horrible 3 years, but having a 3 years where you never knew what the next knock at the door was going to be.
Yeah.
And so ended up starting again. And so in reality, then have packed probably 30 years into 20. But it changed enough, change your perspective on things. And do you know what? I mean, I do a few podcasts, and we did a podcast yesterday with an incredible girl who was an amputee at the age of 16. She was a runner. She got cancer in the bone that went into her knee, and she lost a leg literally just right, really high up right at the top.
Yeah,
and she's her just the way it's affected her life and how she lives her life now. She was just inspirational beyond inspirational. So at the end of the day, I had a business. It went wrong. I owed a few people some cash. That was it. Lost a house. It's a house. Compared with somebody like that, but you still end up with a different take on. You do end up with a different take on the world. Yeah, right. You do. And then sort of start again, but just happened to, and this is where it became serendipitous, because there was no point earning a lot of cash, because at that point in time, I'd got people coming at me left, right, and centre who I was paying a dribble to a week because that's all I could afford. Thinking, well, if this goes on for a couple of years, they'll write it off. But at least I'm doing something, because I didn't feel bad about the bank's money, if I'm being perfectly honest. And so I went to a mate of mine who ran a guitar store in Leeds and said, can you give me a job? I don't need to earn much cash. In reality, it's probably better if I don't earn a lot of cash. Being perfectly honest.
Employee.
So I become the perfect music store employee.
Yeah.
So
you're paying me.
but then it just went it just went really, really quick, really quick from working on the shop floor and just being that kind of self-support guy to suddenly being assistant manager in a store, suddenly to being a head of purchasing in a store. And that's when, that puts me at 2002 and suddenly I'm doing Music Live and Meet Jays. So,
There comes a point, doesn't there, when you realise that time is finite and you've only got a certain amount of time to get stuff done.
Yeah. It's it happens most mornings now when I realise that it hurts every time I try and get out of bed. And which is starting to happen far more than it should. I had a conversation tonight with a mate of mine, and we both coach under 8s football, and we were both talking about how we've got this Raynaud's thing, and that most of the time we can't feel our fingers.
Right, that's where your fingers go blue, right?
Yeah. Well, they go white. They go white.
No, my daughter has it.
Yeah. So, oh God, it's
well, it's interesting, isn't it? You get to 50 or 50ish, and all these interesting reflections come to you, don't they? And you look back at your 20s, and it seems like such a long time ago.
I was teaching today, so I'm teaching first year degree students, so they're 18, and we had one of the best lessons I've had for years, actually, and it was a really difficult lesson to try and navigate because the conversation originally started. You see that poster they did of Reading and Leeds a couple of years ago, and they took out all of the male artists to just leave the female artists. It was like 16% was female or something. So we have a long-ranging conversation about the male gaze, sexism within the industry, blah blah blah. And I got a couple of students, and they were like, "Well, no, you get on a festival bill through merit," and I'm like, "Well, but it goes further than that. Where does the merit come from?" And we're cycling
what's
through
the pool of talent composed of?
And then these two guys are black, and I did ask them how they wish to be referred to in this instance. So then we get on. How would you feel if I took out all of the white artists and we left with just the black? And we had like this really, really brilliant discussion about it, and it was fantastic because none of them argued. They were all really respectful of each other's point of view. And I've got a really interesting class that's kind of like half hip-hop, grime, rap. The other half is rock music, and the two just didn't understand each other, but actually the conversation was so good we carried on for 45 minutes afterwards, stood outside the building.
That is really good.
And it was just fantastic, and they're all going, "Oh no, tell me about this, tell me about that," and it was really good. But when we were outside, we got on to particularly the grime rap kids were like, I really like the lyrics because the lyrics really speak to me. And then I'm like, well, I'm 51 now, so the stuff that I liked when I was 18, I don't listen to anymore because it doesn't speak to me anymore. And they were like, "Do you never go back?" And I go, "Yeah, I do occasionally dip in and kind of go, oh yeah, I'll play some Hanoi Rocks." Yeah, it's fine.
Mind warp. Yeah,
it's fine. I've satisfied that little itch, but I've moved on. I'm not 18. And they were like, "Well, can't you remember what it's like being 18?" I'm like, not really, because it was like 32, 33 years ago.
Jace, I would suggest that if you and I went to a pub and you had a few drinks, you would very quickly regress to being 18 if those songs were on the jukebox. Yeah, and it would be very easy for you to access those memories. For those of the people listening to this who don't know, I met Jason 3 years ago when we started teaching at BIM in Birmingham together. I was doing a part-time course, a couple of courses. Jason was teaching rather more than that, and still is. And I think we both agree that we've been quite educated and inspired by these younger people that we teach. Right? They really, their convictions and their wisdom and insights into life are way more advanced than anything I felt at the age of 18.
Yeah,
I think you feel that too, don't you?
I do. I find them fascinating to talk to.
Yeah.
Once we've got past that sort of like veneer of tutor versus student sort of thing, when you actually have like a proper conversation and you realize their life experiences are so different to mine. Their access to knowledge was so different to mine at 18. And I really hope, because some of these students at the moment are saying, we're into just coming to the end of the first semester in their first year, so they've still got 2.5 years to go, but they're saying, I want to be a promoter, I want to be a manager, I want to be an agent, or whatever it is. And you're like,
you're the people that can change this. You're the people that can change that 16% representation on that thing.
Yeah. Yep.
It's not us. I'm like an old white 51-year-old.
Well, it's not. We have a role to play, man. We're not completely obsolete yet, and I think we never will be as long as we stay engaged and interested. But you're right that I think endemic change has to come from those young people.
Yeah.
But I think it will, because young people are the ones who always say, "This is no good, I'm changing it." Whereas people of our age say, "Oh, it's always going to be like that. You know, don't bother."
I tried to change it. No one listened. I came to accept it.
Oh, dear.
I ended up doing something with the University of Kent the other day. I did a lecture at the University of Kent about the music industry, about people practically moving into the music industry, and more on the side of manufacturing, distribution, and retail. So more in those kind of roles rather than just the creative roles. But at the end, found myself, and they were a fantastic. We were together for a couple of hours, and they're a fantastic, bunch of students.
Yeah.
But you found yourself at the end saying, look, please come into our industry, because our industry, which is dominated by white middle-aged males, needs you to change it. It's not that that there's anything about our industry that is wanting to self-perpetuate. We don't want to strangle our industry. We want it to develop. We want it to change. We want a greater sense of equality in the industry. We'd like more females in the industry. We'd like it to be more representative and more diverse.
Yeah.
But it's a case of, as a group of white middle-aged males, it's impossible to work out how the hell you do that, and you need this impetus of youth to come in and change it. And we've just got to be ready to help. And I do think we can play a part. There's no doubt we can play a part.
It's happening, man. I mean, I'm the editor of Bass Player magazine, which is this pretty massive magazine in our community. Obviously it's not Rolling Stone, it's not Vogue, but it's a big old mag with a heritage.
I'd love to see you edit Vogue. That's so funny.
Can you imagine? This week, Steve Harris from Iron Maiden is on the cover.
You could do a spoof. You could do Vague.
All I was going to say was that my view of representing a diverse community of bass players has been upgraded quite drastically in the last few years. So people of my age who are running these publications, and you could extend that into TV and other media, I think are all starting to understand that we need to come out of this, middle-aged, middle-class, white male perspective sooner rather than later. And actually, while I'm thinking, I don't forget what you said a minute ago, Jason, about how your lesson that you really enjoyed continued into a 45-minute chat afterwards. I have a great story that I want to tell you that I've completely forgotten about, which is that when I interviewed Lemmy in, I want to say 99, it must be 99.
Clang.
Yeah. I interviewed him many times, actually, but the first time I interviewed him, it was in whatever that hotel was in London that he always used to go to. Was it the Metropolitan Hotel or something like that, the Motorhead he always used to use? I went in there, he was sitting at the bar with a bottle of Jack and refilling it with Coke every now and then. And I had a drink with him and did the interview. And it was this killer interview, which has been republished millions of times in various books, because every single line was a quote, was an absolute sort of impactful soundbite or other. And so I did that interview and had my standard half hour. And then he said, "Don't go, hang on a minute." And I know, okay, fine. And just like your lesson that you were talking about a minute ago, he said, "Come up to my room. I want to play you my new album." And at the time, he had recorded a rockabilly album. He did that.
I remember, yeah.
Well, later in life, he did that quite a lot, but he hadn't actually done that yet. So this was the first time he did it. So I went up to his room, sat on his chair in his bedroom, while he played me the demo of this rockabilly covers record. And so what struck me more than just the record was seeing Lemmy on tour. So I looked around his room. I was sort of surreptitiously looking around. He was smoking a fag and kind of gazing straight ahead at the wall while I listened to this stuff. All right. And this is what I saw. And I swear to you, this is true, right? And it's burned into my memory. First of all, there was a suitcase full of Nazi memorabilia on the bed, right? So he was famous for all that stuff being on his wall in his Hollywood apartment. But he obviously had a kind of traveling set that he took around with it, because obviously you can't go on tour without your Nazi memorabilia, right? And it had I don't know, daggers and iron crosses and all this stuff in it. And it was just near the bed. I'd also been kind of looking through it. The other thing, and I swear this is true, was a kind of a shallow tray of water near the bed, right, with some black hairs in it. So I think he'd been dyeing his hair black by the bed, like it was like this tray of water. It's like a kind of silver metal tray with water and loads of black hairs in it. So that was my assumption of what that was, unless you'd been doing witchcraft or something. So I got to see, and I stayed there for like 2 hours, and that was that. I shook his hand and took off. And but it was similar to what you just said, Jason, in the good times extended beyond the allotted time.
Yeah.
Except with Nazi memorabilia and the hairs.
Yeah, I can remember being at the Classic Rock Awards a long time ago, like 10, 12 years ago, something like that. It's the hotel that's by Marylebone. I can't remember what it's called.
It's probably the Columbia, the famous one, is it? That one?
Don't know. But
the famous rock and roll one is the Columbia, I think.
Big glitzy awards from Classic Rock magazine, blah, blah, blah. Went to go for a pee. I wasn't allowed in the gents until Lemmy had finished and come out. There's just 2 bouncers at the door.
That's unusual, because he wasn't generally a dick about security and saying hello to people. He'd always spend time with people, wouldn't he? Maybe he was suffering from some bladder issue which required him to take longer about it. We'll never know.
We'll never know now. No. So
did you get to meet him though? Did you get to?
No.
It's a shame. I met him many, many times. And here's another story about Lemmy, if I'm allowed to tell it.
Yeah.
I was doing an interview with him for Bass Guitar magazine. This is some years later. And in the interim, in the few years since I'd seen him, I had a conversation via the letters page in Q magazine, the much missed Q magazine, where Lemmy had done an interview with them. This was in about 2001 or something. Talked about, again, his Nazi memorabilia. Some reader had written in and said, "Oh, you must be a Nazi then," in that stupid way that they did. And as I saw it, collecting a load of Nazi stuff it's in poor taste without a doubt, but it doesn't make him a Nazi. And he was very clear about his left-wing views and how tolerant he was and so on and so on. And I wrote a letter into Q to their letters page, making that point of view, saying, look, I've met him, I've talked to him. He's not a Nazi. Yes, collecting the stuff is hardly a wonderful thing that I would recommend, but at the same time, it doesn't make him particularly intolerant. And I told Lemmy about this, that this exchange had happened on the phone, and he said, "Oh, could you send it to me?" And I said, "Yeah, sure. What's your email address? I'll scan it in." He said, "No, I don't trust emails, don't trust computers. I've got a fax number." He gave me his fax number. I happen to have a fax machine. So I faxed over the conversation in the Q magazine's letters page, which was the initial letter, and then one back from me. And I got this fax back from Lemmy, handwritten, a full page in his handwriting, which I still have. And it's this treasured thing. Although fucking fax paper's so rubbish, it's faded. But I scanned it in before that happened, and I used it in the introduction to a book which I later wrote about Motorhead in 2011. And it's this wonderful artifact. It has his phone number at the top. And I don't know if you remember, but with a fax machine, you could type in your ID.
Yes.
So, right, yeah, and that would appear on the printout next to the number. And he had written, this is 100% true, Lemmy, bass and vocals. Right? Lemmy, bass and vocals. And then his number appeared on the fax paper, which I blurred out before I printed it in the book I wrote about Motorhead. That was a nice moment. That was great. Man, he was a clever guy, very clever man.
So, I suppose I was looking at the list of books that you've written.
Yeah,
and there's a couple of oddities in there, like Ice Cube.
Most people point to a book I did about Erykah Badu. People say, "What the hell is that doing there?" Next to a book about Slayer or whatever.
Yeah, but it's. Were you? I know you like metal, but was that the goal? Metal books?
Not really. No, the goal was to be a published author. I like lots of book and always have. I like lots of music. Sorry, lots of artists and always have lots of kinds of music. So no, it seemed to me that I remember very clearly suggesting a bunch of books for the very first time in '99, as I said before, and they included metal stuff. There was lots of non-metal stuff as well. The first couple of books that were accepted were on that subject. So I suppose to an extent I became the metal guy, and it's taken until probably the last 5 or 6 or 7 years to not shake it off. I'm not trying to shake it off, but to diversify a bit, because I've subsequently done loads of books that are not on that subject. But the Metallica book was really successful, so that led to a load of other offers of books along similar lines. So I lined them up, and that allowed me to jack in my job. So that is something that I listen to every single day, some form of heavy music. but I also listen to tons and tons of other stuff as well. So yeah, there is the odd anomaly in there.
Actually, I was looking through the list of books, and I was really I hadn't realised you'd written a book on the Sex Pistols. So
it was specifically on the film. The Rock and Roll Swindle film.
Oh yeah. So do you get to interview the Pistols, the remaining Pistols?
Right. So let me think. At the time, I had interviewed John Lydon once, but for a record collector, it wasn't for the book or about the film. Clearly, he wasn't involved in the film. I subsequently went on to meet Glenn Matlock a ton of times, and we did a book together. I haven't met the other two. I never met Malcolm McLaren. That book really is an anomaly for me, because I didn't write it as a Sex Pistols fan. I wrote it because I wanted to get into writing books about films, because I've also been a film journalist and a TV journalist as well. So the fact I probably wouldn't have taken on that commission if it had been about a particular, that one album, but the fact is it was about the film. That was what I was interested in. So your bigger question, do you get to interview these people? I have written many books that are unauthorized biographies of bands. But when I say that, I always have to qualify that with the explanation that because a book is unauthorized does not make it a bad book, just as an authorized book does not mean that it's a good book, right? It depends on the critical depth that you take, it depends on your approach, it depends on the first-hand data you dig up, the interviews that you do that have not been done before, the information that you can present to the reader that is not readily available elsewhere, thus lending the book value. So in that case, as with a lot of those books, you might not necessarily interview the people that you're writing about. Now, as the years passed and musicians began to come to me to ask me to write their authorized biography or to co-write their autobiography, which is a nuance that is a little bit complex and a lot of people don't grasp, then obviously that's all about the official source, info coming from the horse's mouth. So that changed slightly. But your job as the writer is to make the books as good as you possibly can. In both situations, right? A book where you're writing your own third-party view of a band, and a book that involves you sitting down with them and telling their authorized story. Yeah, both of which I've done. Yeah.
I suppose because I'm looking at the official biographer or co-writer list, and you've got Woody Woodmansey from the Spiders from Mars.
Yeah,
the one that I'm really interested to read is the John Mayall book.
Yeah. I know really well. That's the most recent one. That's 2 years ago.
Yeah, and I'm really interested to read that because I remember talking to you when you were writing it, and there's probably lots of stories that you told me we can't discuss on here right now that were highly amusing. But John had actually started the book himself, hadn't he?
The story. So that was unusual. What I'll normally do with a musician is I'll sit down with them, interview them for 50 hours, and turn those audio files into a book. And so at that point, you need your authorly skills to plan the book, to figure out where the chapters go, where the rise and fall of the trajectory and all that good stuff, right? In the case of John, what had happened? He was looking for someone to write his. Right, this is a mental story. He was looking for someone to write his autobiography. So what I thought I would do is sit down with him and start at the beginning and say, right, John, let's go, and finish in the modern day. And I was slightly daunted by this because at the time, he's 87 now, he was 84 at the time. Interviewing someone who's 84 years old about the entirety of their life is a big old job, right? That's probably a year's worth of interviews at least, on and off. But I was up for it. And then before we started that, his assistant said, oh, by the way, we've got this stack of papers lying around here. Turns out he wrote most of a book in the 90s and got printed out onto a hard copy. The computer that he wrote it on was lost or damaged or sold. So we have it on a bit of on paper, on a giant stack of paper, right? do you think we could use it? Like, well, yeah, anything, if it's already done, let me see it. And so somehow they managed to scan it in using optical character recognition software and send it over. And to my amazement, I had 200,000 words of a pretty much complete autobiography, thus saving me probably a year's worth of work. And we were only contracted to write 80 to 100,000 words. So a standard nice big hardback that you guys would read is about, 80 to 100, 120,000 words, that kind of thing. So basically it was kind of mostly done. I just had to edit it down. So that's what I did. I added a chapter on the end to bring it up to date because he'd finished writing it in the 90s. And stripped it down from 200,000 words to the 80 to 90,000 words that we needed. And that was done. So in that sense, I was an editor rather than a co-writer. But so that was an unusual approach that I hadn't done before and hadn't expected, but it certainly made it a lot easier. It was great. John's a nice guy. I really like that guy. What I like about him is that I hope when I'm 87, if I make it that far, Christ, I can't quite imagine it, but if I do, I'll be like him in that I just don't think about the past. I don't live in it. I don't wallow in it. I don't believe in nostalgia. I'm relentlessly looking forward. You know, what can I do? How can I be productive? How can I spend my time in the best possible way that I have left? So for him doing the book, he wasn't that motivated really. He was motivated. He wanted to do it, but it wasn't like he was more interested in his next album. And that I admire that attitude. I think that's admirable. And the book turned out really well. And we got a foreword from Mick Fleetwood. I found quite often with these books that a celebrity foreword is useful for obvious reasons. And Stevie Van Zandt gave us a cover quote. For those who don't know, who is Bruce Springsteen's longtime guitarist and also an actor in The Sopranos. So it was amazing to have him on board because I'm a big fan. So yeah, it turned out really well. Good book. I'll get you a copy.
Oh, excellent. What more could I ask for?
Well, 2 copies maybe.
It's funny you mentioned Mick Fleetwood. I was in the classroom last week.
Yeah.
And we were talking about because I say these kids like hip hop and rap and everything, and there's a reality TV show on BBC. I think it's on BBC called The Rap Game, which is like X Factor but for grime artists, whatever.
All right.
So I thought I'll watch it and then talk to them about it. Right, completely like over my head. My wife was just staring at the TV screen going, I don't understand what they're saying. You know, and so I went in the next day and said, I watched it, blah, blah, blah. And then we got onto music documentaries. And I said, I love music documentaries. In fact, one of my favorites is the one on Rumours. And they were like, what's Rumours? And I was like, Fleetwood Mac. What's Fleetwood Mac? I'm like, Rumours is like the 5th biggest selling album of all time.
No, you can't have been surprised. Come on. What did you know about Little Richard when you were 18? You know?
The thing is, I did.
All right, that's not a proper example then. What was out 50 years before your birth?
50, yeah. So,
Mantovani. I don't know.
I was a big fan of Mantovani. So I opened up my laptop and opened up Spotify and I played them Go Your Own Way, Don't Stop, and the Chain, and they went, this was big on TikTok like 6 weeks ago.
Oh my god.
Oh, I feel so old.
Yeah. I was watching Curb Your Enthusiasm the other day and the theme tune popped up. My son was in the room and he said, wait, what? This music is from Curb Your Enthusiasm. It's a funny YouTube music thing that people put on. But there you go. But I mean, I know you feel this as I do, Jason, because we've talked about it. This music, it's a sin and a crime to look down on these kids for not knowing stuff, because they're so amazing and so embedded in their own world. Why the hell should they? Do you remember last year, Billie Eilish admitted she didn't know anything about Van Halen? And people were going, oh my God, how can you not know about Van Halen? Of course, how the hell is she supposed to know about Van Halen? How is that relevant to her world, you know?
I mean, Van Halen haven't been relevant for 20 years as much as, you know, it came as a shock. In fact, you were the one that texted me before the news broke. That Eddie had died. And it was like, and you know, I wrote on the Guitar Show Facebook page that, in all honesty, I haven't listened to Van Halen for 20 years, but then they haven't actually released any material for 20 years, you know. So why would Billie Eilish would have been like 17 at the time?
Yeah, probably.
But there's another part to this that we need to also think about, which is let's say that music in the sense that we think about it probably started late 50s.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we draw a line from 50,
Elvis was 56.
Yeah, so 56, 57, whatever. Draw a line from there. And we were all born, you know, 69, 70, 71. I mean, we were both born 71. I don't know when you were, Jason, with 70 or what?
69.
69, right, fine. So at that point, there's 20 years of history, maybe 25 years worth of musical history, really, in the sense we're talking about, before you start getting involved in it. What we're talking about now is 75 years worth of musical history.
Yeah, it's a good point.
it's of course we knew about the Beatles and the Stones, because in reality of course we knew about Elvis, because there wasn't that much to actually pick over. And I think that's the bit that we have to cut the kids a bit of slack.
We must.
Simply because we grew up with a relatively small portfolio of stuff that was being played. Our parents were playing us all the same stuff. We were all being played the Beatles, we were all being played the Stones, we were all being played the Kinks, we were all being played all this kind of stuff, because in reality there wasn't a lot of it. And I think what I find really, really not really reassuring is that we were in the kitchen the other night. The last one of these we did was with Bruce Dickinson from Little Angels.
Yeah,
and I'd been going through a little spurge of listening to the Little Angels again, and my 13-year-old came in singing "Product of the Working Class," which is from the second album, and he was humming it, and he didn't really know what he was humming, but he was humming it. So the tune had got into his psyche, and he was humming this tune. And do you know what? That's all we can ask,
right?
Doesn't matter that he doesn't know what it is. Doesn't matter. The Little Angels are never going to form part of his musical journey, really, because he's got so much that's not going to make a dent in it. But the fact is, he recognised it as a good piece of music, and he was humming it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, however they get to it, it doesn't matter. If they get to it and it hits them and they recognise it as music, that's enough.
That's good work on your part, and that's sensitive. I have a similar thing in that my son, who's 14, is a really good drummer. And when he started 3-4 years ago, I was tempted, as I'm sure you can understand, when he started showing an interest in playing drums, in totally getting into it and saying, right, you got to listen to John Bonham, and you got to listen to Dave Lombardo from Slayer, and you got to listen to these 20 songs, and you got to get this drum, and you got to do this, you got to do that. But I didn't, because I knew that would mess it up, because then suddenly it would be Dad's thing, not his thing.
Yeah.
And I'm quite pleased with myself that I backed off. And every now and then, right, if there's a song with a drum track by Zeppelin or whoever that I really want him to hear, I'll just play it in the car while we're driving to school, but I won't mention it, right? I'll just go, and then he'll be getting into it. And, Whereas if I said, you've got to hear this, man, you got to listen to this, and you go, he'd be like, oh, piss off. So it sounds like you did the right thing there. Let it percolate rather than force it on him, otherwise it won't work.
Oh, and I think as well, because our parents did the same thing. I mean, my parents told me how shit Adam Ant was. And do you know what?
Yeah.
They were pretty much right. They were cock on right. But it didn't matter, because Adam Ant...
No, they weren't.
I loved Adam Ant, but I understand why they said it. We all understand why they said this, don't we?
Yeah, but the thing is, if you look at it, let's face it, if you look at it musically, it's not particularly good. If you look at it for what it was, if you look at the reason why we liked it and the fact it was anarchic and it spoke to us and all those kind of things, it was the right thing at the right time. Which means that when some of the stuff that my son listens to, and I kind of cringe and go, look, it's shit, but I know why it's talking to you, and the fact it's talking to you is the important bit. Yeah. Because the musical bit of it, if it's good musically, if it's really got something, it'll still be there. Look, how many of us? When was the last time any of us put on Prince Charming and played it from beginning to end?
Well, a couple of songs aside, I love that record. It was the first album I bought.
That's not what I said. I said
no, I know. But
time.
No, okay. So I haven't put a full album on, listened to it start to finish, any album for years, right? But that album I did play most of the songs from not long ago, which is quite something.
It probably wasn't the world's greatest, but in some respect, it kind of gets to what I'm getting to, which is the reasons why we loved things when we were 10, 11, 12, 13, and for how it spoke to us, they are all the right reasons at the time. And it's absolutely fine for your parents at the same time to go, this is shit.
Well, well, the only thing I would say is that the kids are quite often put off if you say this is shit, and they feel bad about liking something. So you have to watch out,
But I think there's the point. I think where our parents would say, I remember Dad having a right go about that album. I don't say it to Josh. Alison and I'll just go to Al. Oh Jesus, this is really awful. But we don't say it to him. And you know what? It's fine, because actually, when you hear him singing and meaning it, when he's in his bedroom and he doesn't think anybody can hear, and he's singing and he's really meaning it, then that's the important bit, because he means it, because it's touching him, and that's fine, because we did that. We sang "Stand and Deliver" like we really meant it.
And also, it took us away. You know, I feel firmly that music's role is to transcend reality and take us to a better place, a happier place. And if your kids are experiencing that, then your job is done.
Yeah.
You know, that'll be their music will be their friend for life.
And it bloody needed to in the early 80s. You know, it really needed to. I mean, I grew up in, you know, I grew up North Nottinghamshire.
Was it a matchbox at the bottom of the canal?
No, but I grew up remembering, you know, the miners' strike and all the shit that went with that, living right on the middle of that, right on that coal seam, right on that, with all that was going on. It was a grime. It was a fantastic decade for music, but it was a grimy, horrible time.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know? I've had this conversation with the students that it was almost like when we entered the 90s, someone turned the light on. Britain in the 80s, I hate those memes that go around that are like, if you remember this, blah, 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 you were a teenager in the 80s, you know, and it's like, do you know what? It was grim. Everybody was on strike. My school was on strike for about 3 years of my high school education. The miners were on strike. I left school in the midst of a massive recession. The 80s sucked massively. You know, my childhood in the 70s was no better. We had 3-day weeks and the winter of discontent and all of that stuff. Actually, by the time we hit the 90s, it felt amazing.
Well, that was the time you came into your own as an adult.
Yes, yeah, we did. We did.
Yeah. By the time you hit 20, you shake off the shackles of your stupid home life. And I tell my kids, look, believe me, you're going to love it when you leave. You know, I don't think we're particularly rule-bound parents, but you're going to love being away and, you know, finding your own thing and staying up all night and doing all that good stuff. And when you do that, it's huge, isn't it? You know, you can finally explore stuff and have some control and autonomy over your life. And also the early 90s, what a time for music. My God, you know, I mean, still to this day, I'm discovering stuff, British stuff, American stuff, that's still really great. I don't think the 80s sucked for music, man. I think, God, think about it. Start of hip-hop,
I don't.
Manchester, Metallica, you know, all that
I
stuff
don't
is
think
new.
the music sucked.
I still.
You clearly do. You clearly do think that. Apart from in Hollywood, Jace, right?
We're talking Hollywood 86 onwards, just ruled the world.
You see, I'll go the other way. I will say, and I've said it plenty of times before, find me a better decade for music than the 80s. And by that, I mean the sheer diversity of what we got in that decade. If you look at where we started to where we finished and the points we touched in between, that is a monstrous decade.
There's an argument to be made. You know, the technology, the fashions, the rise of MTV, good and bad. I know what you mean. I mean, I'm like you. I was a teenager in the 80s, and you know, I loved Duran Duran and I loved Metallica. All that stuff was so day glow, and I was too young for Led Zeppelin and Deep Purple and Black Sabbath. You know, and all the cool stuff like Chic and Kraftwerk and all that. I missed out on that as well, like we all did, and we all had to backtrack on it. I think probably the music I listen to on a well, as Spotify has just told me, on the most regular basis is 80s and 90s stuff, I think.
Yeah.
But that's probably a function of being 50 years old. So
there's a bit of that. There's a bit of that because I mean, you know, we talked a lot to Bruce about this in the last pod, and you know, that period, because I was never a proper metal guy, but I really liked hard rock, and that period of the mid 90s where you'd got Little Angels and you got Thunder, and there's a whole raft of bands around about the time. From a UK perspective, that was a really, really exciting period of music.
I did fun. Did you say Thunder, by the way?
Yeah,
I did their book, as you've probably seen, a few years ago. That was a lot of fun. They are brilliant guys, and it was a really interesting insight into how you run a band.
Yes,
at that kind of B league level at this point, where everyone's making good money, that no one needs to have another job. But nonetheless, you can't mess about. You know, you can't waste money. You can't take limos everywhere.
No. I do a podcast with Steve Hogarth, who's Marillion's vocalist, and you know, they are widely regarded. They kind of invented that whole.
They're a very similar kind of setup. Actually, I've been to that place they have down in Buckinghamshire. And I got to know Steve Rothery quite well, so I've seen that operation work as well, and I think that's a very similar example. They're clever, isn't it? And as you're right, I think they were the first lot to do it. They
were crowdfunding they crowdfunded in '99. Way before anybody else did it, and I think it took everybody else a little. But I think the point there is you can easily do it. To what you just said, you don't need another job as long as you're careful, and you need a hardcore, 15, 20,000 people you can tap into.
Yeah.
Probably about that sort of number. I've never written it down. I know what
I don't know what it is,
but
that sounds reasonable. They'll show up at the conventions and they'll buy the fan packages and all that stuff.
Yeah. And it's a relatively easy way of distributing, material. And of course, you're not relying on anything because these guys they're still buying physical as well.
Yeah.
But they're also coming out and seeing you play live. And it's become a thing, and it's nice because I guess for our generation, we a lot of the bands that we grew up with are still touring and available to us because of that. Because if we're in the old model, they'd have gone. They'd have all gone. They never would have come back.
Yeah.
But now they're still available, which is fantastic.
Yeah, we're very lucky. It's amazing to me. I look at a couple of music news websites every day, and the amount of it's populated with old bands from the 80s and 90s and before that. Those are the bands. If they put their money away and didn't stick it up their nose, they're still going, in some form or other, right?
Yeah.
Or if they managed to stop sticking up their nose just in time, which I think is probably what most of them did. I think if they stopped snorting at mid-90s, they're probably just about still here.
Crikey.
I know. So on the subject of podcasts,
my second favourite podcast of all time. Not that this is my favourite podcast, but because Fighting Talk is my favourite podcast. But
this isn't in my top 10.
It's not in my top 10 either. But your podcast, Dead Rock Stars, was just the funniest thing I'd ever heard, and because it was generally about music that I knew quite a lot about.
Yeah.
It was just when you told me about it, I can remember sat at BIM with you. And
first day we met, we were interviewing students, weren't we?
Yeah.
And I thought, who's this dick? He's making a lot of noise on the far side of the room when I'm trying to talk. And we started talking, and you said you were a fan of Mick Wall, the writer. And I said, well, I do a podcast with Mick every week. You'll have to check it out. I'm glad you liked it. I really enjoyed doing that.
It was just, I loved the fact that, it was Dead Rock Stars because dead people can't sue. Mm-hmm. Which gave you the freedom to actually kind of say the things that you couldn't say now. And I'd strongly recommend, we'll put a link up to it on this podcast for people to go and find it, because obviously it's still there. Yeah. Have you got any plans to do any other podcasts on your own? Or?
There's a writer called Mark Eglinton who's a similar chap to me, done a lot of well-known rock books, and he and I might do one. The reason why I stopped doing it with Mick is because I just ran out of time. It was sucking up a whole day of my week, and I was teaching at BIM, I was running a magazine, writing books, and so on and so on. So I haven't rushed into doing another one for the same reason, right? Because time is precious. But at some point I would like to. That one with Mick was really good. And by the way, Mick is doing another one now called Get Your Rocks Off, which is really funny, which I suggest you check out. But I hadn't done a podcast before that one. I had this idea. I was driving along and I thought to myself, we should do a podcast. Mick's the obvious guy to do it. And we should call it Dead Rock Stars. And we should just pick a dead rock star each week and talk about it. And in that situation, I was very much Mick's disciple. So he's a few years older than me. I think he's 13 years older than me. And obviously he's Mick Wall, right? I mean, he was the star writer of Kerrang in the 80s when we all read Kerrang. And had all these crazy stories, and he's written many, many good books. But among those books are a couple of autobiographies as well, which tell the story of all the mad stuff he did in America and elsewhere. So in those podcasts, and we did a season of 24, I shared my stories. We talked about a lot of musicians that I'd met, but by and large, it was me listening to him talk about Phil Lynott and Randy Rhoads and Cliff Burton and Freddie Mercury, right, and Prince, and people he had met and hung out with, who I was either too young to have hung out with, or had subsequently died before I was a journalist. And it was great. I was at the master's feet listening to these nutty stories. And Mick is fearless, in his books. And he and I have both written books, for example, on Black Sabbath, and we've both written books on Metallica, and so on. And in every case, his books are much more courageous than mine are, about stepping in and telling truth about people, like slagging them off if they've got horrible, characteristics, which they all do. I was always much more afraid of libel, and I was always much more interested in talking about the music and less interested in talking about the people. But Mick's view is that you should dive into those descriptions of people. And he was right, because they made for very entertaining stories. And those were the stories that we shared on this podcast. So yeah, it's called Dead Rock Stars. You can get it on a platform called Acast, and not all the obvious things. And it's still there. And, one day maybe we'll do another one if we get time. But who knows?
Well, I mean, let's be honest. Most of the current sort of like headline acts that are going around, like Kiss or AC/DC or Aerosmith or something, they're all pushing 70. So you only got to wait about another 10 years and you could have a whole new raft of people.
Well, it's funny. We had that kind of happy-go-lucky attitude at the start. And then as time passed, and we found ourselves every week talking about someone who had died miserably or pointlessly or sadly or just in misery. The witty smiles fell from our faces, and we realized that we were sort of talking about very serious stuff. We were talking about the big things in life, like, so why do we as human beings live? Why do we die? How do we use the time that is given to us? So it very, very quickly became a kind of rather deep metaphysical discussion, as well as the obvious funny stories, which I think was one reason why it was popular. It got The Guardian made it their podcast of the week, which was very nice. It rapidly gained a lot of listeners. So yeah, I'm glad the stuff is still there. I'm good mates with the producer, so he and I might do something else. Mick is, I think, self-producing his current one, but it's very good. It's very funny. He's an inexhaustible fan of stories.
The last one I listened, I know there's a new one out this week, but the last week's was Judas Priest,
right? Which
a mixed impression of a Brummie accent just cracks me up.
Gold,
time.
Isn't it? He used to do this impression of Bill Ward of Black Sabbath every week. It became like something that was expected of him because people liked it so much. It was very funny.
But so you say The Guardian made it podcast of the week because you are Dead Rock Stars and The Guardian is kind of your stock in trade, isn't it? So every time someone with long hair dies, you get a phone call and they're like, Joel, can you write an obituary?
Well, it's not just rock people, actually. I've done a few film people and film directors and all that kind of stuff as well. But there are... So The Guardian's obits desk... they've sort of appointed me their rock person, I guess. So either if someone, it sounds terrible, but if an announcement is made that someone is very ill, not even dead, but very ill, either I will contact them or they will contact me and say, look, let's get an obit ready. The one I did for Lemmy, I think I submitted it 3 years before he died.
I was just about to say that.
Yeah. And on their request, it wasn't my idea. They said, would you do it? And it's, you know what though? It's something you have to take very, very seriously, because quite often I'm told that a family member or the spouse of the person who has died has contacted The Guardian in tears to say, look, thank you so much. Or sometimes, you messed up here. Can we please change this fact? It's a really, really serious task. And what makes that worse is that you've only ever got 3 hours to do it or whatever. Yeah. So the most recent one I did, which was Ken Hensley of Uriah Heep, who I knew, right? The sad thing is, most of these people. I was talking to him 2 years ago for some liner notes for a bunch of Uriah Heep reissues that I was doing. I wanted his family to sign off on the obit, and I wanted Mick Box, who is the guitar player in Uriah Heep, to sign off on as well. So it was incumbent on me to make that happen before I sent it off to The Guardian. So I think they called me on a Saturday morning and said, can you do this? And we need it by first thing tomorrow on a Sunday. So I had to, and there was a funeral going on and people were traveling, and I got hold of their manager. So what I'm trying to say is that it's a complex job, and it's something you have to get right, because you do not want to upset people at the worst point when they do not need to be upset, right? Yeah. With some inaccurate journalism or something that's wrong or comes across as disrespectful. So I do enjoy doing it, and it's incredibly well paid. It's the most well paid thing I do, pro rata, because it's The Guardian, a major publication. But it's something that you have to take seriously as well. And occasionally I do the same thing for The Telegraph, which is the same sort of deal, really. So yeah, it's I wouldn't say it's fun, but it's an honor. These are giant ancient publications. It's an honor to be involved. So yeah.
Wow. Yeah, and you had a question.
Well, no, I was. The problem was it was a bit flippant, and then we got quite serious.
Yes, I do that.
I know.
Suck all the fun out of a conversation.
I know. That's twice you've done it this evening. But to be honest, if we hang around, you might do it again.
Yeah, I'll try to.
but I was going to sort of speculate on the most recent one you've done for somebody that the public thinks is in fairly ruddy health, but probably that seems a little bit inappropriate now.
So like a surprise one, you mean?
Yeah, one that's just been banked.
Oh, I see. I know. I think they've all been used.
Right.
No, I think I did one for Tony Iommi years ago.
Right.
Tony had a cancer diagnosis. I mean, it is a long time ago, isn't it? It's probably 5 years ago, or maybe more. And the Guardian said, "Would you please do an obit?" And I did. And they store it away, and they literally leave a gap for date of death and cause of death. And yeah. And you might even forget about it, right? And then suddenly it appears, and someone drops you a line saying, "Look, you've written about this." And so once again, it's quite sobering. So there you go, taking the fun out of that question. And then I did one. I've done a couple of dance music producers as well. There was Avicii, the kid who killed himself, and the cause of his death was not revealed at the time. I think it was subsequently revealed that he killed himself. And then I did one for Eric Morillo 6 months ago or something, who was the guy behind that terrible song "I Like to Move It," by Real to Real.
Yeah,
from that film, right? Which is everyone's
Madagascar.
Reference, right? Madagascar, yeah. And subsequently, a lot of allegations, unproven allegations, I have to say, but allegations nonetheless of some really dodgy sexual behavior on his part have come out. So because they were only allegations, I didn't put them in the obit. At the request, I should say, of the Guardian staff, the editor. And there were some complaints about that, right? Why didn't you mention this? And there were solid reasons.
It's not really the place, though, is it?
It's not the place, no. But again, are you telling the whole story if you omit that stuff? So the reason I mention this is that it's an illustration of how it's a complex task, right? It's a bit of a tightrope, but you can only use the information that is available to you at the time, and often that is at very short notice. So you go with what is available. As much research as you can do and perform your due diligence as a journalist. So yeah, I haven't messed up too many times. I haven't had people come after me saying you said something horrible about my late husband in your obit. But yeah.
I know he's a hero of ours, Jace, but I wonder how long ago they first lodged Keith Richards.
About 1972, I think.
Had we been born?
Yeah, there's a great meme. I saved it the other day. It will go up on the Guitar Show. Hang on a minute. I found it yesterday. I never cheated death. I beat him fair and square. Keith Richards.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. That's like an old bluesman at the crossroads. Isn't it?
Yeah.
That's great.
I like that. I mean, not that I'd want him to disappear at all, but I felt somehow it would have been in keeping if he died falling out of that coconut tree or whatever it was. That would have just somehow been far more, the kind of thing that would kill him. Everything he put in his body, everything he's done, and actually, he dies falling out of a coconut tree. That would have been quite nice.
But it is weird because we're having this sort of like festival discussion in the classroom today, and I was saying that if we don't do any kind of like positive bigging up younger artists, black artists, female artists, I mean, and we've talked about this before. The problem with, say, download, which is something that we're comfortable in talking about, the Download Festival.
Yeah.
When you look at the headliners of AC/DC, Iron Maiden, Kiss, Black Sabbath, all from the last couple of years. Who's big enough that's behind them apart from the Foo Fighters?
Yeah.
That can, and they can't headline every night.
Every year.
Well, even they are 20 years old. Gene Simmons said it himself the other day. He said that the last big rock band to come out was the Foo Fighters, and that's not recent, right?
No, not at all.
Yeah, it's interesting. You've got bands like Lamb of God and stuff like that are sort of big support acts. When Metallica go and when Maiden go, you will have Rammstein and Slipknot, but those are 25 years old, those bands themselves. Beyond that, you're going to have a load of decent-sized bands, I think. I interviewed Lars Ulrich a few years ago. I mean, I interviewed him tons of times, but I remember once saying to him, could you ever do another Black album, right? So for those who don't know, Metallica's fifth record is this immense-sized album. It's as big as Back in Black. It's as big as Hotel California. It's massive. And I said, well, so will you ever do another Black album, Lars? And he said, it's not that we can't write those songs, but the music industry that exist to support a massive album like that just doesn't exist anymore, right? People don't buy 30 million physical copies of a record paying 10 quid each time or whatever it is. People just don't do that anymore. There's no need for them to do it, therefore they won't do it. So that you can apply that logic to the whole big band situation. Where are the giant bands? They're there, but as you just said, Jason, they're all really old. They're all serving out their time, for one last run. So it'll be interesting to have this conversation in 10 years when we ourselves will be 60 years old, for God's sake, and see who those big, massive bands are. There's not going to be any.
No.
There'll be a load of respectable sized bands, without a doubt, but no behemoths.
I wonder whether Download has to revert back to a Monsters of Rock one day, only 6 or 7 bands on the bill. No,
I think you'll have the headliners being like Lamb of God and Biffy Clyro. And, Biffy Clyro is not a good example because they're really big. But I don't know, what's a big old rock metal band that isn't huge? Machine Head, Trivium, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Big, respectable numbers. These are good-sized bands, but they're not, million sellers, are they? So I think it'll keep going. It will happen.
There's been. It was interesting you just mentioned Biffy there. There's been bands that have been close. I mean, and okay, it's not all rock, but I mean, Coldplay were a good size.
Yeah, big band. Yeah, in their time.
They were a thing, and it may be just the world now. It's easier. It's maybe just easier to do that as a solo act. It maybe is that the world is now geared up for the Ed Sheerans and the Taylor Swifts and the Adeles. Maybe I don't know why that would be, it would, but somehow that's what if you look at what's come along in the past decade.
It's because you only have to split the money one way rather than 4 or 5 ways.
Well, that's very much the Ed Sheeran.
This is why you have so many bands where there's a band leader and then a bunch of salaried employees. Yeah. And I don't object to that model. It seems to make sense. That's actually a recipe for stability. Yeah. In some ways, a benevolent. What's the word? Benevolent dictatorship. I mean, Jace, you're an event organizer. I reckon that these people will still want to go and see bands. They'll still want to have a beer and sing along with a band. Perhaps we're overthinking the size of the band. As long as there's loads of bands and it's fun, and it's people will still go, right? And they'll still pay for it.
It is, yeah. I mean, you could be right. It's interesting that it's Live Nation, isn't it, that run Download, and they spend literally millions on booking AC/DC or Metallica or Kiss to kind of headline it. Which, if you're like me and have access to companies' house accounts, you kind of delve into some of these things and have a look at how much money Glastonbury makes or whatever. And it's not very much. There's a lot of expense for not a lot of return. Now, I understand with Live Nation that it's more about a return on the day because they've got all of these bands signed up, not just for Download, but globally for a number of years. So you could use that festival as a marketing campaign for the tours that follow. But as a standalone event, most of these things don't make that much financial sense.
What about a small festival, like the Guildfest used to be or whatever? Does that have a higher profit margin related to its size?
Well, I think it quite possibly did, but of course that collapsed.
It's a poor example because it did collapse, but when it was solvent, it was seen to be doing well. I mean, you had people I tell you what, we had the aforementioned Adamant. I went one year and there was Adamant, there was Peter Andre, Madness, some not Slade, but someone like Slade, all these sort of reasonable sized bands, and it was a lot of fun. It was packed and it wasn't cheap to go in either. So I'm assuming that much smaller event can make money.
Well, actually, it's funny. I was talking to my mate this week, and we're talking about the Music Live that I used to run and the guitar show, and I was like, do you know what? I was doing some figures for the accountant, so I was looking at like this year's event for end of the financial, because it was in last financial year because it was February, so I've got to go this month to my accountants and sign off last.
Can I just say that's a really interesting story?
Yeah, shut up. And I was saying that the return on investment from the guitar show is significantly more than when I used to run Music Live at the NEC.
So you're promoting your own product here, mate. That's cool.
But the NEC used to cost £560,000 to put on. It was just an insane amount of money to make a decent profit, but actually the return on investment was really poor.
560 grand for a weekend.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous. I mean, admittedly, it's huge.
I mean, you know, but the NEC used to charge me £102,000 just for the empty space.
Can I just say I saw Level 42 at the NEC in 1988.
Did you?
Mm.
With his bass up here?
Yeah. Up there. Sorry, for anyone who didn't spot that, you can imagine he's holding his bass up high. And can I also say, while you're talking about the guitar show, a worthy event. I mean, a worthy event, definitely. But definitely second in importance in the calendar compared to the guitar show, which Future Publishing runs, which is the publisher of my magazine, Bass Player. I just need to say that, all right?
You can say that.
On the record, I want people to understand that. Jason, you know, he has a good go at it. He has a good go. Bless his heart. He has a good go. But, you know, he's very much following our footsteps. Anyway.
That's right. Following in your footsteps with more exhibitors and more visitors.
Right. So is it median? Is it mean? It's all one of those weird, you know, who knows? Statistics? Who knows?
Yes. Right.
All I can say is I've been involved in a number of conversations with Jason about your event, and they've never always gone quite as well as that one did.
You know, Jason, he's a player. He's a big fish in a small pond, and I wish him nothing but the best with his endeavours. And you know, if you can't make it to the real show, why not go? Why not go to
Birmingham?
Oh, bless you!
Oh, what a laugh! What a laugh!
So, moving on. So, what's the next book?
It's the autobiography of Frank Bello, who is the bass player in Anthrax. And while that might sound like Yawn, just another heavy metal memoir, it's a bit different. As I was explaining to you on the phone the other night, Jason, it's a bit of a self-help manual for men, really, who are struggling with the concept of being a son and being a father. So it's very different from the usual approach to an autobiography, because it's designed to impart wisdom that Frank has been through in a fairly traumatic life that he's had so far. So although that might sound a bit dull and a bit earnest, actually, it's not like that at all. It's full of hilarious stories, because he was in Anthrax. He still is in Anthrax, sorry. You know, one of the craziest bands ever who've had this nuts history. But he himself has been through so much trauma that we decided to focus on that for the book. And Gene Simmons has done the foreword, Jason, bringing it back to you.
Yeah, he said you managed to get Kiss in eventually.
Well, I mean, I won't go on about this all day, but briefly, Frank is the world's biggest Kiss fan, apart from you, Jason. And and I said, well, look, why don't I try and get Gene to do the foreword? And Gene has done the foreword. And what's hilarious is that it ties in with Frank's memories of being a teenager and literally waiting outside Kiss's management offices in New York in the 1970s in the freezing cold all day, waiting for Kiss to come out. And this happened so frequently that Gene Simmons would get to know Frank's name and would say, "Oh, Frank Bello," and, you know, and in the end, Frank even got into the studio where they were recording a new album at the time. So it's of extreme emotional significance for Frank that Gene has done his foreword. It's not like we've roped in just some random celebrity. And Gene did a fantastic job, a very, very emotional job, actually, in a way that I haven't really seen from Gene before when I've interviewed him, where he talked about his own father being absent and how he'd achieved redemption through being a good father to his son, you know, like we all try and be to our parents. So anyway, that's quite new. So that's coming out end of next year. And then after that, there's 4 books over the next 3 years. So these things just keep rolling. I mean, I'm basically always working on a book at some stage, either talking with someone about doing a book with them, some musician or some well-known person, or my own book, or the deal is signed and I'm working on it and I'm actually doing the writing and the research, or the book is finished and it's about to come out and we're doing picture research and, you know, all that last minute production stuff, or it's out and I'm doing press. And so that's been very much the way over the last 20 years. And it's nice. I mean, my main job is as editor of Bass Player. That's what I spend most of my time doing. Because, you know, editing these magazines is no joke. You know, it's a lot of work. But I'm able to balance it so that I can do a book or 2 a year as well, plus the odd bit of freelance writing. For example, I write a lot of text every year for the program at the Download Festival, right?
Oh, right.
And a couple of others, the actual printed program that you buy. And also for Bloodstock, I do the entirety of the Bloodstock program. Obviously not this year, and who knows if it will happen next year. So little gigs like that come along as well. And then, of course, I was teaching at BIM with you, Jason, for a couple of years as well, until, again, I ran out of time. which is why I had to jack that in as well as the podcast I was doing. So it's time management really for me, as it is for all of us at this stage in the game. People come to me and ask me if I want to do books with them, and I'm lucky, I'm very fortunate that they'll do that. I turn down a lot of ideas. My view is that if I like the person's interesting, and if I like the music, then I'll say yes, no matter what the deal is, right? Hopefully there'll be a good deal. If the music is not to my taste or the person is a bit of a dick, then I'll usually pass. And that has happened quite a lot. But we're at a point now in the specific field of music autobiography where the market is very saturated. Every someone who was a drummer in Zodiac Mind Warp and the Love Reaction for 20 minutes has got a book out,
Slam Thunderhide. I hope Slam Thunderhide has got a book out. That would be amazing.
Or actually, we mentioned earlier that I did a book with Woody Woodmansey, who's the drummer in the Spiders from Mars. That was a great book, but there has been a whole slew of books from people who played with David Bowie for 90 seconds in 1982. And while it's not for me to bring those people down, sometimes you have to ask yourself, in my position as the author of these books, does the book need to be written? Does it really need to be written? Is a publisher going to risk a significant amount of money in this? If they're not, is it worth my while? What are my other motivations for doing it? Because I love music? Probably not. But fortunately, from my point of view, people like me and Mick Wall and Mark Eglinton, who I mentioned earlier, and a few others, we can make a decent living out of this. And it's fun and it's great. What we're doing is we are committing the history of our culture for future generations to read. When we three are long underground, people will be reading these books in physical or digital format for hundreds of years. And I tend to go into these books with that in mind. So sometimes someone I'm working with will say, I want to name this manager who fucked me over, man. And I'm like, in 200 years, do you want your descendants reading that? Or should we allocate some page space to something a bit more positive? And that's happened on innumerable occasions, that a negative story, they wanted to put it in, and I said, let's not. And then it became really obvious afterwards that it would have been a crap idea to put it in for all sorts of reasons. So, yeah, that's what I do.
Well, can you at some point document, I mentioned it earlier, that wonderful time of sort of Brit rock in the late 80s, early 90s, that's Little Angels, Thunder, The Wild Hearts, The Almighty,
Choir Boys,
Who
Dogs
could
D'Amour.
forget the Choir Boys? I think that's a book for you to do, my friend. I'm a fan of Thunder, and I listen to all the rest of that stuff. I was obsessed with those Zodiac Mind Warp albums. That's why early songs. That's why I keep bringing them up. I never really got into the Choir Boys and the Dogs D'Amour. I knew they were there because I read Kerrang every week. Read every word of Kerrang.
Yeah.
But what I might do, and actually I'm putting this pitch together now for a publisher, is I've had this idea in my head for ages that 1991 was rock's year zero, right? Heavy rock's year zero in America. Because in 1991, you had Metallica's self-titled album. You had Nevermind, and you had Blood Sugar Sex Magic by the Chili Peppers. And my view is that between those three albums, they changed hard rock permanently. Permanent, at least for the entirety of the 1990s.
Well,
because suddenly people were listening to grunge. People were listening to grunge, alternative rock in the form of Nirvana, which became grunge, which begat alternative metal, funk metal, and new metal. And all that lasted until at least 2000, 2001. So what I may do, if I can persuade someone to publish it, is do a book on 1991. And what's interesting is that I lived it in real time, right? I was 20, like we all were. So that was I remember watching that Smells Like Teen Spirit video and not actually being that impressed, and then realizing that I couldn't get away from it. All people were doing was listening to Nirvana and the Chili Peppers and Metallica. And suddenly, you remember this, Jason, you could not listen to Bon Jovi or Wasp or Cinderella anymore without looking like a complete, outmoded idiot.
Yeah, I kind of I genuinely listen to music for pleasure.
Yeah.
And that whole grunge thing, which actually, as I've got older, I've come to appreciate. It just seems so inward looking and miserable.
It was.
That I just was like, it used to be fun. I bailed on the rock scene at that point. I was still listening to Faith No More. Always seemed to be having fun.
Yeah. they had this kind of sarcastic outward look upon things, didn't they? In fact, in my Spotify thing, it just told me that my most listened song this year was a Faith No More song, Last Cup of Sorrow. And I'm like you, I'm always a big fan of those. Sorry, I interrupted you, but basically I was agreeing with that. Yes, they kind of stood to one side, didn't they? You know?
Yeah, so I sort of like dropped out. The only sort of band that I kept interested in their new albums was the Black Crows. And they always were freakily
just a different kind of music, wasn't it? Yeah, yeah.
I think what happened that hard rock scene then went off in a load of different directions, so it didn't almost have to compete. So you got it either popified itself. So if you think about it, okay, before Nevermind, I think the last Bon Jovi album was, it was the fourth or fifth one, wasn't it? It was the one with Dry County and Keep the Faith was, so you got that. And then after that, they then become a pop act to a certain extent for a couple of albums. It becomes very, very poppy. You know, Aerosmith disappear off into a direction, essentially making soundtracks for movies. You know,
I think that's a little reductive. That one song was huge. I mean, it was inescapably massive and saved their asses. I think.
Oh, it did, but they're not the same. You know, because I liked Aerosmith before that point.
Yeah,
and I like the scuzzy 70s. You know, fucked up Rolling Stones.
Well, again, I've come to appreciate that in later life. Right now, I get it. Toys in the Attic makes total sense to me. At the time, it was a bit lightweight compared to Slayer and whatever I was listening to in my kind of, you know, black or white mind about what was good. But what you just said about it splinting off in different directions was what made it interesting. I mean, Alice in Chains and Soundgarden and Pearl Jam and Tad and Melvins and, you know, the earlier stuff like Mudhoney and all that stuff. You could go back and really dive into it, couldn't you? Do a deep dive into how amazing it was. And even then, when you started getting into Korn, you know, and Cold Chamber, and then later on Limp Bizkit and Slipknot, it wasn't for everybody. And in fact, a lot of it really hasn't stood up well. But what is interesting about all that stuff to me is that it represents a 1990s way of thinking. So many of these 80s bands were either wiped off the map or completely struggled for no reason other than MTV decided that plaid shirts were cool.
Yeah.
Blows my mind.
It was it was almost overnight.
It pretty much was.
Yeah, I mean, you know, so we both worked with my mate Paul Dreadlocks, who does all the artwork for Guitar Show and did it for Music Live and stuff like that. And
is that his name, Paul Dreadlocks?
Yeah, Paul Dreadlock. And he was saying, because we were both going, we didn't know each other at the time, but we were both going to the same clubs in Birmingham, rock clubs and stuff like that. And he said that he was always in like the little room downstairs that played like indie music, like The Cure and stuff like that.
Stuff.
Yeah, and we were upstairs listening to, it would have been Guns N' Roses, Faster Pussycat, Motley Crue, blah, 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 blah. And then all of a sudden the rooms flipped. And we were shoved in the tiny little room, and all of that weird alternative music was what
James Dixon and whatever. Yeah, it was. So that's all. This fascinates me, right? And I can't think of an equivalent seismic sort of thing that happened in music that was in my formative years. I'm sure subsequently, you know, if I'd been 10 years younger, Britpop would have been the thing. And if I'd been 5 years younger than that, it would have been emo. You know. And I was there for all that stuff and paid attention to it, but it wasn't as personally important to me because by then I was like 30, you know, and I knew what I wanted to listen to. Anyway, so that I might do that book. That would be fun, I think.
That'd be very interesting.
I think so.
You can send me a free copy.
Charge you for the postage.
No, I'll just meet you halfway and we'll have a pint.
You know, I found, I was looking at eBay idly, as you do, and I found a copy of one of my books that someone was selling that I had signed to a friend of mine. It said, hey Katie, you know, love Joel, whatever.
Yeah.
And I emailed her and said, what the fuck? And she said, oh my God, I'm really embarrassed. I've just split up with my boyfriend and he's taken a load of my stuff and he's selling it. But that kind of made me laugh.
I tell you what, she did well there on the hoof. That was a good excuse.
Yeah.
She did really well there.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if it being signed added more than 10p to the value of the book, but no, that was funny. We had a laugh about it.
Maybe you could put a little note on the auction saying you're happy to sign it again. Change the name. You can actually have it properly, you know. It's a very sustainable way of working. Good for the
So
planet.
I got an email back, like, it must be 15 years ago now, from this guy saying, "Oh, I live in San Francisco and I'm broke and I'm very ill. All I want is a copy of this particular book that you've written." I went, "Oh, okay, no problem." And I sent it to him. And then about 5 years later, he said the same thing. And I went, "Oh, okay, yeah, I'll send it to you." And a few years after that, he was in the news, right, in America, in San Francisco, being this terminal ripper-offer of people, just scrounging free stuff. He had like a warehouse full of this crap. And I had just gone, "Oh, yeah, no problem. Yeah, let me send that to you. I'll put a tenner in as well.
Was he opening a library in San Francisco?
Fair play to the guy, God damn.
Well, we probably ought to come to some kind of stop, really.
Meaningful conclusion, yeah.
Well, I don't think we need to put anything meaningful in, because that would undermine the previous hour and a quarter. But it's been an absolute pleasure.
Well, it's been a lot of fun. Thank you for letting me come on and drone about my books. It's been a pleasure.
No, it's been really, really, really nice. And you must do something else in the podcast space.
Thank you. I'd love to come back. Yeah. When I have something slightly more meaningful to say, or a product to promote, then I'll come back and bore you about it.
Well, no, I was thinking more about, you must do something of your own again. That void needs to be filled.
Well, I'm not sure it does, frankly. I think people like you are doing a very good job of podcasting. And of course, it's this massive growth industry now, isn't it? There's billions of them. So I don't know if my voice needs to be added to the pile. Probably my skills are best used as a book writer and a magazine editor. But thank you for that. And thank you, Jason, for what you said earlier about Dead Rock Stars. That was so much fun doing that. But in the meantime, I think I'll let you guys do all the hard work. Thank you.
That's okay. The great thing is that we can say goodbye now, and then we can carry on recording, and I can just go, of course, their show isn't as good as mine. And there is no comeback from you at all.
Yeah. I was expecting that, Jason. And in all seriousness, your show is great. It's just not as good as ours.
The only thing that gets in the way of you saying that, Jace, essentially is the truth. That's the only problem with what you've just suggested is the fact that factually it's just not true.
When you've been a writer as long as I have, you know that the truth is a mere side issue.
Oh, it gets in the way. It gets in the way. Listen, I've got a politics degree. I know the truth.
Yeah. A mere man-made construction.
It's a massive inconvenience.
So I'm just stood here with the 3 chords and the truth.
Yeah.
Oh,
or something approaching it. I know. Yeah.
Bloody hell. All those guitars, and you can only play 3 chords.
But they're
Thank
the
you,
right 3 chords.
You guys keep not letting me. Thanks for having me on.
No, cheers, Joel. Take care.
Right, we'll speak again. Cheers, guys.
Bye.
See ya.
Thanks for listening to 9 to 42, the podcast from the team at the Guitar Show UK. If you've enjoyed the show, then please remember to hit the subscribe button and share with other like-minded souls. For more information about 9 to 42, please follow us on Facebook, Twitter or Instagram at the Guitar Show UK. This has been an A Short Stories production.